Captain Marcus stood tall at the palace gates, his armor gleaming under the morning sun. For 15 years he had served as the royal guard with complete dedication. His reputation was spotless, and the royal family trusted him with their lives. Every morning was the same routine: check the perimeter, inspect the guards, and ensure the palace remained safe. The autumn wind carried fallen leaves across the courtyard as Marcus made his usual rounds. The palace was quiet, as most of the royal family was still asleep. He enjoyed these peaceful moments before the day became busy with visitors, meetings, and ceremonies. His boots echoed against the stone pathway as he walked toward the east. Wing. That's when he heard it, a soft sobbing coming from behind the rose garden. Marcus stopped and listened carefully. The sound was definitely crying, and it seemed to be coming from a child. This was unusual because children rarely came to this part of the palace grounds. The east wing was mostly used for storage and was generally empty during morning hours. Following the sound, Marcus walked carefully around the tall rose bushes. His hand instinctively moved to his sword, not because he expected danger, but because he was trained to be prepared for anything unusual. As he turned the corner, he saw a small figure sitting on the ground near an old stone bench. It was a young girl, probably around 8 or 9 years old. She was wearing a simple brown dress that looked worn and dirty. Her long, dark hair was messy and tears streamed down her face. She was hugging her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth while crying softly. The sight immediately touched Marcus's heart, as he had a daughter of similar age back in his home village. Marcus approached slowly, not wanting to frighten the child. He removed his helmet and knelt down to her level, making himself appear less intimidating. His voice was gentle when he spoke. "Hello there, little one. What's your name? Why are you crying?" The girl looked up with wide, frightened eyes. She had been crying for so long that her cheeks were red and puffy. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand and stared at Marcus for a long moment. He could see fear in her eyes, but also something else. Desperation. "I'm Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not supposed to be here. I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I didn't know where else to go." Marcus felt his heart break a little. The child was clearly lost and scared. He wondered how she had managed to get past all the palace security. The palace grounds were supposed to be completely secure with guards posted at every entrance. "It's okay, Emma. You're safe now. Can you tell me how you got here? Are your parents looking for you?" At the mention of parents, Emma started crying, even harder. She shook her head frantically, and Marcus realized he had touched on something painful. He waited patiently for her to calm down, occasionally offering gentle words of comfort. After a few minutes, Emma reached into a small pocket in her dress. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper that looked like it had been folded and unfolded many times. Her small hands were shaking as she held it out to Marcus. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "You have to read this. You have to help me. Nobody else will listen. They all think I'm lying, but I'm not lying. I promise I'm not lying." Marcus took the note carefully. It was written in a child's handwriting, with some letters bigger than others and words that were misspelled. But as he began to read, his expression changed from gentle concern to serious alarm. The more he read, the wider his eyes became. The note described something that made Marcus's blood run cold. It talked about people in the palace, people he knew, people he had trusted. It described conversations Emma had overheard, plans that were being made, and dangers that were coming. Most shocking of all, it mentioned the royal family and a plot that would happen very soon. Marcus read the note twice to make sure he understood correctly. His hands were shaking slightly as he looked back at Emma. This little girl had somehow discovered something that could change everything. If what she had written was true, then everyone in the palace was in terrible danger. "Emma, where did you hear these things? Who told you about this?" "I heard them talking," Emma said, still crying. "They didn't see me because I was hiding. They were in the old tower near my village. They kept saying they had someone inside the palace helping them. They kept saying that after tomorrow everything would change." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Tomorrow was the harvest festival, when the entire royal family would be gathered in the main courtyard for the celebration. Hundreds of people would be attending, including many from outside the kingdom. It would be the perfect time for someone to carry out a terrible plan. He looked at the note again, studying every word. Emma had written down names, times, and details that a child couldn't possibly make up. She had somehow overheard a conversation about a plot against the royal family, and she had been brave enough to come to the palace to warn them. But Marcus also realized something terrifying. If the people Emma had overheard really did have someone helping them from inside the palace, then he couldn't trust anyone. He couldn't go to his superior officers because one of them might be the traitor. He couldn't alert the other guards because the helper could be anyone. Marcus stood up and looked around nervously. Suddenly, the peaceful palace grounds seemed full of hidden dangers. Every shadow could be hiding an enemy. Every guard could be the traitor. Every servant could be working for the people who wanted to hurt the royal family. He looked down at Emma, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. This brave little girl had risked everything to try to save people she didn't even know. She had walked all the way from her village to the palace, somehow gotten past all the security, and waited in the cold garden just to deliver her warning. Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. For 15 years, he had never left his post without permission. He had never disobeyed orders. He had never done anything that could be considered abandoning his duty. But now, holding Emma's note, he knew that his real duty was to save the royal family, even if it meant breaking all the rules. Marcus tucked the note safely into his armor and helped Emma to her feet. His mind was racing with possibilities and plans. He couldn't stay at his post, knowing what he now knew, but he also couldn't leave Emma alone and vulnerable. The little girl had already shown incredible courage by coming this far, and he wasn't going to let anything happen to her now. Emma, I need you to be very brave, okay? We're going to leave the palace right now, and I'm going to take you somewhere safe. But first, I need to know exactly what you heard. Can you remember everything they said? Emma nodded eagerly, wiping her tears away. As they walked quickly toward a side exit that Marcus knew was rarely guarded, she began to tell him everything she remembered. Her story was both incredible and terrifying. 3 days earlier, Emma had been playing in the woods near her village when she got lost. While looking for the path home, she had discovered an old watchtower that she had never seen before. The tower looked abandoned, but she could hear voices coming from inside. Being curious like most children, she had climbed up to peek through a broken window. Inside, she saw 5 men gathered around a table covered with papers and maps. They were dressed like merchants, but they spoke like soldiers. Emma had hidden behind some old wooden crates and listened to their conversation. What she heard made her realize that these men were planning something terrible. They talked about the harvest festival and how it would be the perfect opportunity to strike. They mentioned having weapons hidden in barrels that would be brought into the palace as decorations. Most frightening of all, they kept referring to their inside man, someone who worked in the palace and would help them carry out their plan. Emma told Marcus that she had tried to tell the adults in her village, but nobody believed her. They thought she was making up stories or having bad dreams. Some of them even got angry at her for spreading foolish tales about the royal family being in danger. Desperate, and with nowhere else to turn, Emma had decided to come to the palace herself. I walked for 2 whole days, Emma explained as they reached the side gate. I slept in barns and ate berries I found along the way. When I got to the palace, I hid in a supply cart that was coming through the gates. Nobody saw me because I covered myself with vegetables. Marcus was amazed by the child's determination and cleverness. As they slipped through the side gate, he realized that Emma had probably saved not just the royal family, but hundreds of innocent people who would be attending the festival. But now came the difficult part, figuring out who they could trust and how to stop the plot. They hurried through the streets of the capital city, keeping to the quieter alleys and side roads. Marcus knew they couldn't go to the palace authorities, because the traitor might be anyone from a guard to a high-ranking official. He also couldn't go to the local city guards because he had no proof except the word of a child, and they might not believe him either. As they walked, Marcus thought about everything he knew about palace security and the upcoming festival. The Harvest Festival was always the biggest celebration of the year. The royal family would all be present on the main balcony to address the crowds. There would be hundreds of visitors, performers, and merchants bringing goods for the celebration. If someone wanted to smuggle in weapons or dangerous people, the festival would indeed be the perfect cover. Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve and pointed to a building ahead of them. That looks like the tower where I heard them talking. It had the same kind of stones and the same shape windows. Marcus studied the building carefully. It was indeed an old watchtower, probably built decades ago when the city was smaller. Now it stood on the edge of the newer districts, surrounded by shops and houses. It looked abandoned, but Marcus noticed something that made him suspicious. There were fresh horse tracks in the mud near the base of the tower. "Emma, I want you to wait here while I take a look," Marcus said, leading her to a small bakery. He spoke to the baker and asked him to keep an eye on the child, telling him it was official palace business. The baker, recognizing Marcus's uniform, agreed immediately. Marcus approached the tower carefully, using his military training to move quietly and stay hidden. As he got closer, he could hear voices coming from inside, just as Emma had described. He found the same broken window she had used and positioned himself to listen without being seen. What he heard confirmed his worst fears. The men were finalizing their plans for the next day. They discussed their positions during the festival, the signals they would use, and the timing of their attack. Most chilling of all, Marcus heard them mention specific details about palace security that only someone with inside knowledge could know. One of the men was clearly the leader. His voice was cold and calculating as he gave instructions to the others. "Remember, our friend inside will make sure the guards are distracted at exactly noon. That's when the royal family will be most vulnerable on the balcony. We'll have 15 minutes to complete our mission before anyone realizes what's happening." Another voice, younger and more nervous, asked about escape routes. The leader laughed darkly. "We're not planning to escape, boy. This is about sending a message that will change the kingdom forever. Tomorrow people will remember the day the old order fell." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. These weren't just criminals planning a robbery. They were political extremists planning to assassinate the entire royal family during the most public event of the year. The chaos and panic that would follow would throw the entire kingdom into turmoil. He listened for another few minutes, trying to gather as much information as possible. He learned that they had at least 12 people involved in the plot, including their inside contact at the palace. They had weapons and explosives, hidden in various locations around the city, ready to be brought to the festival site. Most importantly, he discovered that their leader would be disguised as a wealthy merchant from a neighboring kingdom, complete with official papers and a large entourage. As quietly as he had approached, Marcus crept away from the tower and returned to Emma. The little girl was sitting at a table in the bakery, sharing a piece of fresh bread with a stray cat. Despite everything she had been through, she still had the innocent kindness that made children so special. "Did you find them?" she whispered as Marcus sat down beside her. "Yes, I did. Emma, you were absolutely right about everything. These are very dangerous people, and you were incredibly brave to warn us. Now I need to figure out how to stop them." Marcus's mind was working furiously. He couldn't go back to the palace because the traitor would immediately know that their plan had been discovered. He couldn't trust any of the official authorities because he didn't know how deep the conspiracy went. But he also couldn't let the festival proceed as planned, knowing that hundreds of innocent people would be in danger. As the afternoon sun began to set, Marcus realized that he would have to take matters into his own hands. For the first time in his military career, he would have to act completely on his own, without orders or backup. The lives of the royal family, and possibly the future of the entire kingdom, now rested on the shoulders of one loyal guard and a brave little girl who had refused to let evil plans go unchallenged. That evening, Marcus found a small inn on the outskirts of the city where he and Emma could spend the night safely. The innkeeper, a kindly woman named Martha, immediately took to Emma and insisted on giving her a warm bath and a proper meal. While Emma was being cared for, Marcus sat in his room staring at the crumpled note and trying to figure out his next move. He had less than 18 hours before the festival began. The royal family would start appearing on the palace balcony at noon, just as the conspirators had planned. Marcus knew he couldn't stop the entire festival. It was too big, with too many people involved. But maybe he could turn the conspirators' own plan against them. As the night grew darker, Marcus made a decision that would require him to trust people he had never met before. He couldn't work with anyone from the palace, but there were other people in the kingdom who cared about the royal family's safety. He thought about the merchants who had grown prosperous under the current king's fair trade policies, the farmers who had been protected from bandits by royal guards, and the common people who genuinely loved their rulers. Early the next morning, while Emma was still sleeping, Marcus carefully wrote several letters. Each letter contained the same basic information about the plot, but was addressed to different people throughout the city: merchants, blacksmiths, tavern owners, and other citizens who he hoped would believe him and help. He couldn't risk giving too many details in case the letters were intercepted, but he provided enough information to convince them that the danger was real. When Emma woke up, Marcus explained his plan to her. They would return to the city, but instead of trying to stop the conspirators directly, they would work to protect the royal family in a different way. Emma listened carefully and nodded with the same serious determination she had shown from the beginning. "I understand," she said quietly. "We can't trust the people who are supposed to protect the king, so we have to find other people who will help us." Marcus was continually amazed by how smart and brave this little girl was. Together, they made their way back into the city, which was already bustling with activity as people prepared for the harvest festival. Colorful banners hung from every building, musicians practiced in the squares, and merchants set up stalls selling special festival foods and decorations. But Marcus now saw all of this activity with different eyes. Every merchant could be hiding weapons. Every performer could be a disguise for an assassin. Every decoration could contain something dangerous. The very celebration that was meant to bring joy and unity to the kingdom had been turned into a trap. Marcus spent the morning carefully delivering his letters to people he hoped he could trust. At each stop, he watched their faces carefully as they read. Most people looked shocked and frightened, but he could see that they believed him. A few asked questions, but when Marcus showed them his royal guard identification and let them see Emma, they realized he was telling the truth. By 11 o'clock, Marcus had created an informal network of citizens who were watching for suspicious activity throughout the festival area. They weren't trained soldiers, but they knew their city, and they cared about protecting their neighbors. Marcus positioned them at key locations where they could observe without being obvious. Meanwhile, Emma had her own important job. Because she was small and looked like any other child enjoying the festival, she could move around freely and listen to conversations without attracting attention. Marcus had taught her to recognize the voices she had heard in the tower, and to look for any of the signs that might indicate the conspirators were putting their plan into action. As noon approached, the crowds grew thicker around the palace courtyard. The royal family began to appear on the great balcony, looking magnificent in their festival robes. King Robert waved to the cheering crowds. Queen Isabella smiled graciously at her subjects, and the young princes laughed with delight at the colorful decorations and performances below. Marcus positioned himself where he could see both the balcony and most of the courtyard. His heart was pounding, knowing that somewhere in this happy crowd were people who wanted to destroy everything the kingdom stood for. He checked his sword and dagger, making sure they were ready if he needed them. Exactly 5 minutes before noon, Emma appeared at his side. Her face was pale but determined. "I found them," she whispered urgently. "They're near the fountain, dressed like spice merchants. I recognized the leader's voice when he was talking to someone. They have 3 large barrels with them, and I could smell something strange coming from them." Marcus looked in the direction Emma pointed and spotted the group immediately. They were indeed dressed as merchants, with expensive clothes and an impressive display of spices and herbs. But Marcus's trained eye noticed things that others missed: the way they positioned themselves with clear views of the balcony, the fact that their hands stayed close to their weapons, and the nervous energy that surrounded them, despite their casual appearance. "Good work, Emma. Now I need you to go to Martha's friend who runs the flower stand. Remember what I told you: if anything goes wrong, you run straight to her and she'll keep you safe." Emma nodded and melted back into the crowd. Marcus began, moving carefully toward the fountain, using the dense crowd as cover. As he got closer, he could hear fragments of conversation that confirmed these were definitely the conspirators. They were speaking in code, but Marcus understood enough to know that they were making final preparations. At exactly noon, as the king stepped forward to begin his traditional harvest festival speech, Marcus saw the leader of the conspirators give a subtle signal to his men. That's when Marcus noticed something that made his blood freeze. One of the palace guards standing near the balcony had given an almost identical signal in return. The traitor wasn't just someone who worked in the palace. It was someone who was supposed to be protecting the royal family at that very moment. Marcus watched in horror as the guard began moving other guards away from their positions, creating gaps in the security around the balcony. Marcus realized that his moment had come. In seconds, the conspirators would begin their attack, and innocent people would die unless someone stopped them. He thought about his 15 years of loyal service, his oath to protect the royal family with his life, and the brave little girl who had risked everything to warn them of this danger. Drawing his sword, Marcus took a deep breath and prepared to face the most important battle of his life. Around him, thousands of people continued to celebrate, completely unaware that their entire world was about to change forever. The fate of the kingdom now rested in the hands of one loyal guard, who had chosen to believe a child when no one else would. Marcus moved swiftly through the crowd, his eyes locked on the conspirators near the fountain. He could see them reaching into their barrels, pulling out objects that glinted dangerously in the sunlight. Time was running out, and he knew that, within moments, chaos would erupt in the peaceful festival. As he pushed through the dense crowd of celebrating citizens, Marcus caught sight of the network of helpers he had organized that morning. The blacksmith was positioned near the eastern entrance. The baker had stationed himself close to the main stage, and several other trusted citizens were scattered throughout the area. They had all received his signal and were now watching for his lead. The king's voice echoed across the courtyard as he began his traditional harvest speech. "My dear subjects," King Robert announced, his voice carrying over the crowd, "once again, we gather to celebrate the bounty of our land and the unity of our people." The irony of those words, spoken just as enemies prepared to strike, was not lost on Marcus. Suddenly, Marcus heard a child's scream that cut through all the other festival sounds. He turned to see Emma pointing frantically toward a different part of the crowd. Following her gaze, he spotted two more groups of conspirators that he hadn't noticed before. They were positioned at opposite sides of the courtyard, creating a triangle of attackers with the fountain group. This was worse than he had imagined. They had planned a coordinated attack from multiple directions. Marcus realized he couldn't handle all three groups by himself. He needed to make a choice that would save the most lives. The group near the fountain was closest to the royal balcony and posed the most immediate threat, but the other groups could escape if he focused only on one target. Making a split-second decision, Marcus raised his sword high above his head, the predetermined signal for his citizen helpers to act. Throughout the courtyard, ordinary people who had never been soldiers suddenly became heroes. The blacksmith tackled two suspicious men who were reaching for hidden weapons. The baker knocked over a barrel that was being positioned dangerously close to the crowd. A group of farmers surrounded another conspirator who had been trying to get closer to the balcony. The leader of the fountain group saw what was happening and shouted orders to his men. But instead of backing down, Marcus charged directly toward them. His battle cry cut through the festival music and laughter, finally alerting the crowd that something was terribly wrong. "Protect the king," Marcus shouted as loudly as he could. "Attack on the royal family, everyone get down." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The celebrating crowd suddenly realized they were in danger. Some people screamed and tried to run, while others looked around in confusion. The musicians stopped playing, and an eerie silence fell over parts of the courtyard, broken only by sounds of struggle, where Marcus's helpers were fighting the conspirators. On the balcony, the royal family looked down in shock and concern. King Robert stepped forward, trying to see what was happening, but Queen Isabella pulled him back. The palace guards who weren't part of the conspiracy finally realized what was occurring and began moving to protect the royal family. But Marcus could see that the traitor guard was still trying to sabotage their efforts. The corrupt guard was directing other guards away from the most dangerous areas and creating confusion about where the real threats were located. Marcus knew he had to expose the traitor as well as stop the attack. Fighting his way through the panicking crowd, Marcus reached the fountain just as the conspiracy leader pulled a crossbow from one of the barrels. The weapon was aimed directly at King Robert on the balcony above. Marcus threw himself forward, his sword clashing against the crossbow just as it was fired. The bolt went wide, striking the stone wall beside the balcony instead of finding its royal target. "You!" the conspiracy leader snarled, recognizing Marcus as a palace guard. "You should be helping us, not fighting against us. Don't you know what kind of corruption exists in this kingdom? We're trying to save everyone from the lies and the greed of the nobility." Marcus fought desperately against 3 attackers at once. His years of training served him well, but he was outnumbered and the conspirators were well-prepared fighters. "You're not saving anyone," he shouted back, deflecting a sword thrust that came dangerously close to his heart. "You're just murderers who want to destroy innocent lives." Around the fountain, the battle was fierce but brief. The conspirators had been prepared for a quick strike, not a prolonged fight. When their surprise attack failed and they found themselves facing organized resistance, several of them tried to escape. But Marcus's citizen helpers had positioned themselves well, and most of the attackers found their retreat routes blocked. Emma, despite Marcus's instructions to stay safe, had not remained at the flower stand. Instead, she had worked her way closer to the palace balcony, where she could see the corrupt guard who was still trying to create confusion among the loyal guards. With the same courage that had brought her to the palace in the first place, Emma climbed onto a decorative statue where everyone could see her. "That guard is working with the bad men," she shouted, pointing directly at the traitor. "I heard his voice in the tower. He's the one who was helping them plan this." Her young voice carried clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the courtyard. Every eye turned to look at the guard she was pointing toward. The corrupt guard's face went white with panic as he realized his cover had been blown by the same child who had exposed the entire conspiracy. The traitor tried to draw his sword, but he was immediately surrounded by loyal guards who had heard Emma's accusation. Within seconds, he was disarmed and captured. As they seized him, several pieces of paper fell from his uniform, papers that would later prove to contain detailed information about palace security that he had been providing to the conspirators. Marcus finally defeated the last of the attackers near the fountain, though he was wounded and exhausted. As the immediate danger passed, he looked around the courtyard and saw that his desperate plan had actually worked. The attack had been stopped, the royal family was safe, and most of the conspirators had been captured or defeated. King Robert, who had been watching the entire battle from the balcony, now came down into the courtyard surrounded by his loyal guards. He walked directly to Marcus, who was leaning heavily on his sword and breathing hard from the fight. "Captain Marcus," the king said, his voice filled with emotion, "I have been told that you abandoned your post yesterday and disappeared without orders. Normally, this would be cause for severe punishment. But I think I'm beginning to understand why you broke protocol." Marcus straightened up as much as his injuries allowed and looked his king in the eye. "Your Majesty, I can explain everything. But first, you should meet the real hero of this day." He gestured toward Emma, who was being helped down from the statue by several amazed citizens. Emma walked shyly toward the king, her small hand still clutched around the wrinkled note that had started everything. The crowd had grown quiet, watching this extraordinary scene unfold. Many people were still confused about what had just happened, but they could see that their king was safe and the danger had passed. King Robert knelt down to Emma's level, just as Marcus had done in the palace garden the day before. His royal robe spread around him on the ground, but he didn't seem to care about the dirt or the dignity of his position. All that mattered was this brave little girl who had somehow saved his entire family. "Hello, young lady," the king said, gently. "I'm told that you have something very important to tell me." Emma looked up at the king with wide eyes. Despite everything she had been through, she was still just a child meeting the most important person in the kingdom. She curtsied awkwardly, the way children in her village had been taught to greet nobility, and then held out her precious note. "Your Majesty," she said in her small voice, "I wrote down everything I heard the bad men saying." Captain Marcus believed me when nobody else would. He left his job to help me save you and your family. The king took the note carefully and read it slowly. As he did, his expression changed from curiosity to amazement to deep concern. Even though the danger was over, reading the details of how close his family had come to disaster made him realize just how much they owed to this unlikely pair of heroes. "Emma," the king said after finishing the note, "this is the most important document anyone has ever given me. You risked your life to bring me this warning, and you saved not just my family, but everyone who came to celebrate with us today. You are the bravest person I have ever met." Around the courtyard, people were beginning to understand what had really happened. Word spread quickly through the crowd about the little girl who had discovered the conspiracy and the loyal guard, who had believed her when everyone else had failed. The mood changed from confusion and fear to amazement and gratitude. Queen Isabella and the young princes came down from the balcony to meet Emma personally. The queen, who was known for her kindness, immediately embraced the little girl. "You must be hungry and tired after all you've been through," she said warmly. "Would you like to come have lunch with us in the palace?" Emma's eyes grew even wider. "Really? I can eat lunch with the queen?" "Not just lunch," King Robert announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard so everyone could hear. "Emma, from this day forward, you will be an honored guest of this kingdom whenever you wish. You will never want for anything, and your family will be cared for as long as they live. And when you're old enough, if you choose, you will have a place in the palace serving the kingdom you saved." The crowd erupted in cheers. People who had been running in panic just minutes before were now celebrating the courage of a small child and the loyalty of a dedicated guard. Musicians began playing again, but this time their songs were about heroes and bravery instead of just harvest celebrations. But Marcus, despite his relief that the danger was over, knew that there was still work to be done. The conspiracy had been larger than just the men they had captured. There were others involved who had not been at the festival, and there might be more traitors in the palace who had not yet been discovered. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, stepping forward despite his wounds, "we need to investigate this conspiracy thoroughly. The men we captured today were just part of a larger group. Emma heard them mention other people and other plans. We need to make sure there are no more threats to the kingdom." King Robert nodded seriously. "You're absolutely right, Captain. But first, you need medical attention for those injuries, and you both need rest after everything you've been through. The investigation can begin tomorrow." As palace physicians tended to Marcus's wounds and Emma was taken to the palace for food and a proper room, the harvest festival gradually returned to normal. But it was a different kind of celebration now. Instead of just thanking the land for its bounty, people were celebrating the courage that had saved their kingdom and the loyalty that had protected their rulers. In the days that followed, the full extent of the conspiracy became clear. The captured men, faced with undeniable evidence, revealed information about a larger network of rebels who had been planning to overthrow the royal family and establish a new government. Some of them genuinely believed they were fighting corruption, while others were simply greedy for power. The investigation led to the discovery of weapon caches in several locations around the kingdom, forged documents that would have been used to legitimize the rebels' claims to power, and a list of nobles and officials who were either willing supporters or potential targets for elimination. Most shocking of all, they discovered that the conspiracy reached into neighboring kingdoms where certain nobles had been promised parts of the territory in exchange for their support. What had seemed like a local threat had actually been part of an international plot to destabilize the region. Throughout the investigation, Emma proved to be an invaluable witness. Her memory for details was remarkable, and her honest, straightforward way of describing what she had seen and heard helped the investigators understand exactly how the conspiracy had been organized. Marcus, despite his heroic actions, was troubled by how close the plot had come to succeeding. If Emma hadn't been in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, if she hadn't been brave enough to make the dangerous journey to the palace, if she hadn't been persistent enough to keep trying when adults dismissed her story, Any one of these factors could have changed history. "It makes me realize," he told King Robert during one of their private meetings, "that we need to listen more carefully to all of our citizens, even the youngest ones." Emma saw something that all of our intelligence networks missed. Maybe there are other people out there who know things that could help protect the kingdom. The king agreed completely. One of the first changes he made was to establish a new system where any citizen could bring concerns directly to the palace without going through layers of officials who might dismiss or ignore them. He also increased security measures, but in ways that relied more on the vigilance and cooperation of ordinary people rather than just professional guards. As the weeks passed and life in the kingdom returned to normal, Marcus found himself changed by his experience. He had always been a loyal soldier who followed orders without question, but now he understood that sometimes the most important duty was to think for yourself and do what was right, even when it meant breaking rules. 6 months after the Harvest Festival attack, the kingdom had settled into a new rhythm of peace and security. The conspiracy had been completely dismantled, with the remaining rebels either captured or fled to distant lands. The changes King Robert had implemented were working well, and citizens felt more connected to their government than ever before. Marcus had been promoted to captain of royal security, a new position created specifically for him. His duties now involved not just protecting the royal family, but also developing new ways to keep the entire kingdom safe from future threats. He had proven that sometimes the best security came from listening to unexpected sources and thinking beyond traditional methods. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Emma's life. True to his word, King Robert had ensured that her family was well cared for. Her parents, who had initially been terrified when they learned their daughter had gone to the palace alone, were now the proudest people in their village. Emma's father, a simple farmer, had been given better land to work, and her mother had been offered a position helping to organize the new citizen communication system the king had established. Emma herself had become something of a celebrity. Throughout the kingdom, songs were written about the brave little girl who had saved the royal family, and her story was told in schools to teach children about courage and doing what's right even when it's difficult. But fame hadn't changed Emma's essential nature. She was still the same kind, curious child who cared about helping others. During those 6 months, Emma had visited the palace many times. Queen Isabella had taken a special interest in her education, arranging for the best tutors to teach her reading, writing, mathematics, and history. Emma proved to be an exceptional student, with a natural intelligence that had been sharpened by her extraordinary experiences. Marcus had also become like an older brother to Emma. He taught her about the palace, the kingdom, and the responsibilities that came with the special position she now held. More importantly, he helped her understand that her bravery on that crucial day was not just a single act of heroism, but the beginning of a lifetime of service to others. On a warm spring morning, exactly 6 months after the Harvest Festival, Emma was walking through the palace gardens with Marcus. They had developed a tradition of taking these walks together, talking about everything from palace politics to Emma's dreams for the future. "Marcus," Emma said, stopping beside the same rose bushes where he had first found her crying, "do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been playing in the woods that day? What if I had never found that tower, or heard those men talking?" Marcus considered the question seriously. Over the months, he had thought about this many times. "I think," he said slowly, "that somehow, some way, the truth would have come out. Good people like you have a way of being in the right place at the right time when the world needs them most." Emma smiled at this idea. "I used to think it was just luck that I was there. But now I think maybe it wasn't luck at all. Maybe it was supposed to happen that way." As they continued walking, they came upon a group of young palace pages practicing their sword work under the instruction of an older guard. Emma watched them with interest, as she always did when she saw people learning new skills. "Emma," Marcus said, following her gaze, "King Robert and I have been talking about something, and we'd like to know what you think." "What is it?" Emma asked, turning her full attention to him. "Well, you're still young, and you have plenty of time to decide what you want to do with your life. But we were wondering if you might be interested in training to become part of the Royal Guard when you're older. not as a regular soldier, but as someone who specializes in the kind of intelligence work that helped save the kingdom. Emma's eyes widened with excitement. You mean like a spy, someone who listens and watches for danger? Marcus laughed. Something like that, yes. You have natural abilities that most people never develop. You notice things others miss, you remember details perfectly, and you have the courage to act when action is needed. Those are exactly the qualities we need to keep the kingdom safe. Emma was quiet for a long moment, thinking seriously about the offer. Finally, she looked up at Marcus with determination in her young eyes. I would like that very much. I want to help protect people the way you protected my family and me. Later, that day, King Robert made an official announcement that would be recorded in the kingdom's history books. Emma would become the first member of a new branch of the Royal Guard, the Citizen Protectors, people who came from ordinary backgrounds, but had shown extraordinary dedication to the safety and welfare of the kingdom. The ceremony took place in the same courtyard where the Harvest Festival attack had been stopped. Emma, now dressed in a special uniform designed just for her new role, stood proudly beside Marcus as King Robert addressed the assembled crowd. 6 months ago, the king announced, our kingdom faced its greatest threat not from an invading army or a natural disaster, but from enemies who lived among us and planned to destroy everything we hold dear. We were saved not by our strongest warriors or our wisest advisors, but by the courage of a child and the loyalty of a guard who chose to trust her when everyone else had failed. The crowd, which included many of the same citizens who had helped fight the conspirators, cheered enthusiastically. They had all become part of this story, and they understood that their own actions had been crucial to its happy ending. Today, King Robert continued, we establish a new tradition. From now on, the citizen protectors will serve alongside our regular guards, watching and listening for threats that might come from unexpected directions. They will be our early warning system, our connection to the people we serve, and our reminder that sometimes the most important wisdom comes from the most unlikely sources. Emma stepped forward and took an oath similar to the one Marcus had taken 15 years earlier, promising to protect the kingdom and its people with her life. But her oath also included new elements that reflected the lessons learned from their shared adventure. Promises to listen to those who might be dismissed by others, to act on truth even when it was difficult to believe, and to remember that real strength came from caring about others more than yourself. As the ceremony ended, and people began to celebrate, Marcus and Emma found themselves standing together in the spot where their story had begun. The rose bushes were blooming again, filling the air with sweet fragrance that reminded them both of that frightening but transformative morning. Are you ready for this new adventure? Marcus asked Emma. Emma looked around the gardens, then up, at the palace where the royal family lived safely thanks to their efforts, then back at Marcus with a smile that showed wisdom far beyond her years. I've been ready since the day I decided to trust you with my note, she said. I learned that, when you know something is wrong, you have to do something about it no matter how scared you are or how many people don't believe you. That's what being brave really means. Marcus nodded, knowing that Emma had learned one of life's most important lessons at a very young age. Together, they walked back toward the palace, ready to begin their new roles as protectors of the kingdom. The experienced guard who had learned to listen with his heart, and the young girl who had proven that courage and truth could overcome any conspiracy. Their story would be told for generations, inspiring other ordinary people to extraordinary acts of bravery. And in the years that followed, the kingdom would indeed remain safe, protected not just by walls and weapons, but by the vigilance and courage of citizens who understood that everyone had a role to play in defending what they loved. The note that had started it all was carefully preserved in the royal archives, a reminder that sometimes the most important messages come written in a child's uncertain handwriting, and that the greatest threats to any kingdom can be defeated by the simple power of one person choosing to do what's right.